Hello, History 131. Welcome back. Will be lecture number 2 and a continuation of the class that we started last week. We talked about the origin of man and their development through the Paleolithic Age and the Neolithic Age, Old Stone Age, New Stone Age. Let's do a little brief chronology here, bring you up to date. Some 4 to 5 million years ago, a hominid creature, creatures developed. If you've taken a look at the PowerPoint slide I loaded last week, you will see the remnants of the skeleton remains of what is called Lucy, a real short lady, woman, probably about 2 to 3 feet tall, small crania, but she began to walk upright. During this particular period, the Paleolithic Age began, but about 500 to 2 million years ago, a new species, a descendant from the hominid, arrived called the Homo erectus. They evolved and spread out of Africa between this time period, between 500,000 to 2 million years ago. Later, a third branch off from the hominid developed. The Homo sapien evolved in Africa about 200 years ago. And then around 120,000 years ago, the Homo sapien migrates from Asia, migrates to out of Africa to Europe, Asia. About 50,000 years ago, human migrated all the way to Australia. Also during this time period, we see the Neanderthal flourish in Europe and Western Asia. And we possibly see the migration of human migration from Asia to the Americas using the land bridge during the Ice Age to cross over the Bering Sea. This is the time where we see the earliest evidence of woven cloth and baskets, and this would later lead to the Neolithic Age or the Agricultural Revolution. Let's look at this Paleolithic society though. Their members were divided into two main groups, men who hunted and women who raised children and gathered nuts and seeds. So the role of by gender developed during this time period. Men became the hunters and women became the gatherers, hunter-gatherers. During this Paleolithic time, the family included aunts, uncles, and other relatives. The family were organized into two large groups known as tribes and protected its members. The spread of human beings from Africa to all the continents of the earth was one of the most significant events of the entire Paleolithic Age. That occurs between 400,000 to 8,000 BCE. The work expected of women in the Old Stone Age society made women, not men, the likely inventor of weaving and agriculture. Interesting. Men in Old Stone Age society formed a cohesive group who shared work and rituals tended to separate them from the women and children. At the end of the Ice Age, which ended, we see humans beginning of Neolithic horticultural domestication of sheep and goats and dogs. We later see the domestication of cattle, the development of plows for agricultural, the invention of pottery wheel, All of these things are taking place during the agricultural revolution. So the agricultural revolution led to the establishment of civilization, and this period occurred during the Neolithic age. So systematic agriculture was a result of the agricultural revolution during the Neolithic age. The Neolithic era witnessed the beginning of large-scale exchange because a spread of agriculture created a surplus of food, which also increased the population, the growth of the population. So, where should we begin in this, continue this chapter? It's chapter 2. It's entitled Mesopotamia and what else is it called? Complex society in Southwest Asia, Mesopotamia, and the Nile Valley. Now, we're also going to talk about two other groups, three groups: the Assyrians, the Hebrews, and the Persians. And then we will go to India, and then we will have test 1. Okay, so the agricultural revolution has occurred. Man has put down roots, stopped chasing behind wild herds or animals. Now they have domesticated the animals, which provided them a food supply, and milk, and cheese, and hides for clothing. But it also, some woman maybe planted a seed and the crops grew. So this was the beginning of the production of grain crops, corn in the Americas, wheat, barley, oats, rye, which is high in protein. Again, because of this change, man population vastly increased. Their physical status also increased and changed. Now, the crania is beginning to grow, the skull, which leads to more abstract or critical thinking to solve problems. And so, the first civilization we're going to talk about is Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia simply means land between the rivers. What are the rivers? The rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates. Both began in northern Iraq. Mesopotamia today is the modern state of Iraq. That should be familiar with you. We went to war in Iraq in 2003. I still think we have soldiers and troops there. But in the middle of the Middle East, this civilization developed. Now, what do we know about the climate and the geography there? It is a desert. It is dry, horrible winds. And so the rivers are key to the development of civilization in Mesopotamia. You had the Euphrates to the east and the Tigris to the west. And in between these rivers as well, Mesopotamian civilization. Now, when we speak of Mesopotamian, we are talking about three groups. The first group would be the Sumerians. The Sumerian would be overrun by another Semitic group called the Akkadians. The Akkadians will be conquered later by the Babylonians. We're going to talk more about them as we go. So, the Sumerians are key here. They are important to the rise of the Mesopotamians. Their major city was Ur, and they developed a building tool, a building material that still survives today. As I just described to you, there are no trees in the desert of Iraq. So the Sumerian came up with a building material, mud bricks. They would gather the mud from the Tigris and Euphrates, put it in a mold, and let them dry. And this is where brick making come in. And so they built a city, and of course, a city needed a wall to protect it from outsiders and invaders. So the wall was built with bricks, and so was the homes and other structures. Another structure at the center of the town was called the ziggurat. It was a place of worship. Now, not like we know today. These are indigent people developing a religion based upon the things they can observe. Uh, but they believe in gods that control the rivers, the deserts, the man himself. A superior beings. They were polytheistic. They believed in more than one god or goddess. Uh, the economy was primarily agricultural, because you couldn't survive without food. Uh, they traded with other people, including the Chinese and the Egyptian, who we're going to talk about later. They had three major social groups: the noblemen, the commoners, and slaves. Slave is a constant in ancient history. So, these are the Sumerians. Now, how do we know so much about the Sumerians? They invented the first known writing system in the world, called cuneiform, or wedge-shaped writing. This writing was done on clay tablets, and this invention is very significant. Now man can document his existence here on earth. This ends prehistory and began history, because now man is recording his activities, his lifestyle here on earth. The Sumerian wedge-shaped writing, that's what cuneiform is called. And it's very simple, just like our alphabets. It's a phonetic type writing where you develop symbols or alphabet that create sound. If you remember, when you learned to read and write, the first thing you learned was your alphabets. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's our language, and that's how we learn to read and write, by assigning sound to the emblems or the symbol. In this case, it'll be A, B, Ba, C, Ka. You combine the alphabets to create words, words combine to create sentences, sentences combine to create paragraphs. Phonetic teaching. If you are an early educator, planning to become an educators of young people, please understand this concept of phonics. Okay. What else? The culture of Mesopotamia. Okay, the Sumerian had built this unique culture, gave it a religion, gave it an identity, but they would be overrun by Sargon, a man known as the world's first conqueror of the ancient world. And Sargon did not discard the culture of the Sumerian. He kept it and built upon it. These are the Akkadians. Let's talk about this culture for a minute. Religion was important. Art and science developed during this particular time. Building materials, but organization as a group, the Sumerians. The Akkadians were overran by the Babylonians. You heard of them. The reason we know so much about the Babylonian is from the writing of the king Hammurabi. He gave the world its first law code. The code of Hammurabi consisted of 282 laws. Hammurabi provided an insight into almost every aspect of everyday life there and provided us a priceless glimpse of the value of the early society. It was a strict law code. Penalties for criminal offense were severe and varies according to the social class. So this is comparable to the Mosaic law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But under Hammurabi, it only applies to if you're in the same class. If a slave killed another slave, he was put to death. But if a nobleman killed a slave, he was not. He could pay for his crime and get away with it. Sounds familiar, right? Okay. But this Hammurabi Code tells us all, describe this culture to a T. Example, builders were held responsible for the building they constructed. If a house collapsed and caused the death of the owner, the builder was put to death. The number of law in the Hammurabi Code dedicated to land tenure and commerce revealed the importance of agriculture and trade in the Mesopotamian society. Laws concerning land use and irrigation were especially strict, an indication of the danger of a decline in crop yield if the land was used incorrectly. It also regulated loan rate, usury, interest on loans. But the largest category of the Hammurabi Code focused on marriage and the family. Parents arranged marriage for their children, love didn't have anything to do with it. After marriage, the parties involved signed a marriage contract. Without it, no one was considered legally married. So, what is marriage even today? This is something handed down to the West and to America through the Mesopotamian and the Hebrews. Marriage is an official contract. Now, you can enter into the contract in a church, any religious edifice, but to break this contract, you have to go to the courthouse because it's a contract made between two individuals. Marriage is a legal contract. Don't ever forget that. That will be on your test. But the husband provided a bridal payment for the woman's parents, and the parents of the female were responsible for a dowry to the new husband. As in many patriarchal societies, that means controlled by men. Women possess fewer privileges and rights in the married relationship than men. It was considered a woman's place was in the home, and failure to fulfill her respective duties was ground for divorce. If she was not able to bear children, her husband could divorce her, but he did not have to return the dowry to her family. If a wife tried to leave home to engage in business, thus neglecting her house, her husband could divorce her and did not have to repay the dowry. If the wife was a Gladfly, she slept around. The neglecting, if she neglected her house and her husband and humiliated him, she could be drowned in the river. So there's no crime or punishment for the man. If he went out and had an affair or went to the brothel, he was rewarded. It's no different than today. If a man sleeps around, he's considered to be manly. If a woman sleeps around, she's considered to be a hoe, prostitute, or whatever. Bad. But both are doing the same thing, but each are being judged differently. A woman could seek divorce only if she could prove that she had done anything wrong. A mother could also decide which of her son could receive an inheritance. Sexual relationships were strictly regulated as well. Husbands, but not wives, were permitted sexual activity outside of marriage. And guys, this will go on all the way up into the modern time period. It's a man's world. He controlled everything. A woman and children were looked upon as property or a possession. She, the mother of the wife, did not own herself. The husband or the father owned the female. A wife caught committing adultery was pitched into the river. Incest was strictly forbidden. If a father had incestuous relation with his daughter, he would be banished. Incest between son and mother resulted in both being burned. Fathers ruled with their children as well as their wives. Obedience was strictly and duly expected. A father could disinherit his son if he wanted to. So, now in literature and art, these people contribute greatly. Look up, I want you to Google the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's really the story of the Great Flood in the Old Testament. But first, it came from the Mesopotamia. You got to remember, Abraham, the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, came from Mesopotamia, migrated to Judah some later. But these concepts were still in existence before Abraham and Moses. And of course, I told you about writing, cuneiform, etc. But the Mesopotamian laid a foundation that will be emulated and passed on from generation to generation. On our next meeting, we'll go south to another river valley and talk about the Egyptians, the Nile River. And then we'll leave there and move to Asia, leave Africa and go back to Asia and look at the Indian civilization created alongside the Indus River Valley. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I will load this and hopefully some more PowerPoint slides. And eventually this week, I will load your study guides, which will go over everything that I talked to you about today. Be blessed, stay safe, and God bless you. Bye-bye.